The slap echoed through the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel like a gunshot. My daughter-in-law Tiffany did not just want my blessing. She wanted the keys to my penthouse. And when I said no, she struck me across the face in front of 150 guests. I did not yell. I did not fight back. I simply walked out to my car and made one phone call. 15 minutes later, when the doors opened again, it was not the police who walked in. It was a woman my family had not seen in years. And when they realized who she was, the color drained from their faces and the real crying began. But to understand why I had to destroy my son's wedding to save my dignity, you have to understand what happened 5 minutes before that slap. My name is Harrison Caldwell. Most people call me Harry. I am 70 years old, and I have spent my entire life building things. I built skyscrapers in Chicago. I built bridges in California. And for the last 32 years, I thought I was building a family. I stood near the open bar, holding a crystal flute of champagne that probably cost more than my first car. The Pierre Hotel in New York City does not do things cheaply. The chandeliers above me were gleaming with thousands of crystals. The jazz band was playing a soft, expensive tune. The flowers alone, white orchids imported from Thailand, had cost me $40,000. In total, I had written a check for $250,000 to make this night perfect. $250,000. That is $250,000 for a party that lasts 6 hours. But I did it for Jason. He is my only son. My late wife Martha would have wanted him to have the best. She passed away 2 years ago, and since then, Jason has been my whole world. I watched him dancing in the center of the floor with his new wife Tiffany. She looked stunning, I have to admit. Her dress was a custom Vera Wang piece that I also paid for. But as the song ended, she did not stay with her husband to enjoy the moment. She smoothed her dress, looked around the room, and then walked straight toward me. Her eyes were not filled with gratitude. They were not filled with the joy of a new bride. They were focused and sharp like a hawk spotting a field mouse in the grass. I smiled as she approached. I thought she was coming to thank me, maybe to give me a hug, maybe to tell me that she wished Martha was here to see this. I was ready to be the proud father-in-law. She leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and champagne. She whispered in my ear, but her voice was ice cold. Harry, give me the keys to the Manhattan penthouse. Right now. My parents need to stay there tonight. I blinked. I thought the music was too loud. I thought I had misheard her. I said, "Excuse me, Tiffany?" She sighed, rolling her eyes as if I were a slow child. My mom and dad, Harry. They hate their hotel room. The bed is too hard and the room is too small. They want to stay at the penthouse tonight. Give me the keys. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The penthouse on 5th Avenue was not just an apartment. It was my home. It was where Martha and I had lived for 40 years. It was filled with her antique books, her art collection, her clothes that still hung in the closet because I could not bear to pack them away. I was currently living there. It was my sanctuary. I looked at Tiffany, trying to keep my voice steady. I said, "Tiffany, that is my home. I booked a luxury suite for your parents at the St. Regis. It is a 5-star hotel. It is fully paid for. It is literally down the street." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her nails dug slightly into my tuxedo sleeve. She hissed, "The St. Regis is old and stuffy. They want the view from the penthouse. They want the space. And honestly, Harry, you are barely there anyway. You are just one old man in 4,000 square feet. It is ridiculous. Just hand them over. Jason promised me you would do it." My blood ran cold. Jason promised. My son had promised away my home without even asking me. I looked over at Jason. He was laughing with his groomsmen, oblivious. Or maybe he was avoiding eye contact. I straightened my back. I have negotiated with union leaders and hostile board members for 40 years. I was not going to be bullied by a 28-year-old Instagram model. I said no, that is final. My wife's things are there. It is not a hotel for your parents. Tiffany's face twisted. The beautiful bride mask fell off completely. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated venom. She raised her voice, not caring who heard. She said, "Oh, for God's sake! Martha is dead, Harry. She has been dead for 2 years. She is a rotting corpse in the ground. Why are you hoarding a dead woman's junk? You are just a selfish, lonely old man who cannot let go." The disrespect took my breath away. It felt like a physical punch to the gut. She had spoken about Martha, the kindest woman who ever lived, as if she were trash. I felt my hand shake. I reached out to gently move her hand away from my arm, needing to create distance. I said, "Do not speak about my wife like that. You have no right." And then it happened. She raised her hand. Snap! The sound was incredibly loud. It cut through the jazz music like a gunshot. It stopped the conversations at the nearby tables. My cheek burned with a fierce, stinging heat. She had slapped me, hard, right in the middle of the ballroom at the Pierre. The music stopped. The chatter died. 150 heads turned toward us. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I stood there, my hand touching my stinging cheek, looking at the woman my son had just married. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wild with entitlement and rage. She did not look sorry. She looked furious that I had defied her. I looked for Jason. I saw him rushing over from the other side of the dance floor. And for a split second, I had hope. I thought he would be angry. I thought he would defend his father. I thought he would be the man I raised him to be. Jason grabbed Tiffany by the shoulders, but he looked at me. His eyes were pleading, weak. He whispered, "Dad, why did you have to provoke her? You know she is stressed. Just give her the damn keys. Don't ruin this for me." My heart shattered. It didn't break. It shattered into dust. My son just watched his wife assault me and he blamed me. He wanted me to hand over my home to keep the peace. I looked at Jason. I looked at Tiffany, who was now fixing her hair and glaring at me. I realized then that I was alone in that room. Despite the money, despite the years of love I poured into that boy, I was just an obstacle to them. A wallet. A resource to be used and discarded. I did not scream. I did not hit her back. I did not make a scene. I gently placed my champagne glass on the nearest table. The clink of the glass against the coaster was the only sound in the room. I looked at Jason one last time with a look that I hope haunts him for the rest of his life. I turned my back on them. I walked through the silent crowd. I could feel their eyes on me. I could hear the whispers starting. But I kept walking. I walked out of the ballroom, down the grand staircase, and out into the cold New York night. The valet brought my car, my old Lincoln. I sat in the driver's seat, my cheek still throbbing. I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage that was rising inside me. I dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. Before I tell you who answered that phone and what happened next, press the like button if you think I should have kicked them out right then and there. Subscribe to the channel, because what I did next was not just revenge. It was justice. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if your child chose their spouse over you after they physically hurt you? I held the phone to my ear. It rang once. Twice. A woman's voice answered. Sharp, professional, dangerous. "Harrison, it is Saturday night. This better be good." I took a deep breath. I said, "Veronica, activate Protocol 19, right now." There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and looked up at the hotel windows. They were still celebrating in there. They thought the old man had gone home to cry. They thought they had won. They had no idea that I had just pulled the pin on a grenade and I was about to walk back in and drop it right in the middle of their wedding cake. The party was over. The war had just begun. The slap on my cheek was still throbbing, a hot, pulsing reminder of the humiliation I had just endured. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the sight of my son rushing toward me. Jason pushed his way through the stunned guests, his face flushed, his eyes wide. For a fleeting, desperate second, my heart leaped. I thought, finally, he sees. I thought he was coming to grab his wife's hand and demand an explanation. I thought he was coming to defend the man who had raised him, the man who had just paid $250,000 to give him this fairy tale night. I braced myself for his apology, for him to tell Tiffany she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But as he reached us, he didn't look at me with concern. He didn't even look at the red mark blooming on my face. He went straight to her. He wrapped his arms around Tiffany, who immediately buried her face in his chest, letting out a sob that sounded as fake as the diamonds I knew she wanted. Jason rubbed her back, whispering soothing words to her, before turning his gaze on me. And the look in his eyes wasn't anger at her. It was annoyance at me. "Dad, seriously." Jason hissed, his voice low and tight, vibrating with frustration. "Why do you always have to do this? Why do you have to be so difficult?" I stood there frozen, the air leaving my lungs. "Difficult." I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Jason, she just hit me. She struck me in the face because I wouldn't give her the keys to my own home." Jason rolled his eyes, a gesture so dismissive it felt like a second slap. "She is stressed, Dad. It is her wedding day. You know how she gets when she is overwhelmed. Why did you have to provoke her? You couldn't just say yes. You couldn't just hand over the keys and keep the peace for one single night." "Provoke her?" I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I booked them a 5-star suite, Jason. I paid for this entire reception. And I am provoking her by wanting to sleep in my own bed, by wanting to protect your mother's things." "Oh, give it a rest about Mom's things," Jason snapped, his voice rising now loud enough that the guests nearby were leaning in, hungry for the drama. "It is just an apartment, Dad. It is just stuff. And honestly, it is way too big for you anyway. You are one old man rattling around in 4,000 square feet of prime real estate. It is ridiculous. Tiffany and I have been talking about it. You shouldn't be living there alone. It isn't safe. You should be in a facility." The world seemed to stop spinning. A facility. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and cold. A nursing home. That was their plan. That was what they discussed when they thought I wasn't listening. They didn't just want the keys for the night. They wanted me out. They wanted to warehouse me in some home so they could take over the penthouse. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the tuxedo I bought him. I saw the expensive watch on his wrist that was a graduation gift from me. I remembered sitting at my desk just last week signing that check for $250,000. I remembered him sitting across from me, smiling, telling me how much he appreciated everything, how he would always take care of me. "You're the best dad in the world," he had said. "We'll never let you be lonely." It was all a lie. Every smile, every thank you, every hug. It was just a performance to keep the bank account open. He didn't see a father standing in front of him. He saw an obstacle. He saw a stubborn old man who was taking too long to die and get out of the way of his inheritance. "Jason, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. "I raised you better than this. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me, by standing there holding the woman who assaulted me and telling me I belong in a nursing home." Jason's face turned an ugly shade of red. "Stop throwing your money in my face," he shouted. "That is all you ever do. You think because you write the checks you get to control us. You think you own us. We are adults, Dad. If you want to be part of this family, you need to make sacrifices. Just give her the damn keys and stop ruining my wedding. Be part of the family." He was threatening to cut me off if I didn't let them rob me. I looked at Tiffany. She had lifted her head from his chest. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at me with a triumphant smirk, her eyes cold and hard. She knew she had won. She had turned my own son into her weapon. I felt a sudden strange clarity. The confusion vanished. The hope vanished. The father who would do anything for his son died in that moment right there on the ballroom floor. I looked down at the crystal champagne flute I was still holding. I looked at the golden bubbles rising delicate and expensive. I reached out and placed the glass on a high-top table next to me. I set it down gently, with deliberate care. The soft clink of glass on glass was the only sound I heard louder than the murmurs of the crowd. It was the sound of a door closing. It was the sound of a checkbook snapping shut forever. "I am done," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact. What Jason asked, frowning, looking confused by my sudden calm. "What does that mean, give me the keys, Dad?" I didn't answer him. I didn't look at him again. I turned my back on them both. I turned my back on the son I had adored since his first breath. I started to walk. I walked away from the head table, away from the dance floor, away from the life I thought I had. As I walked away, Tiffany realized she was losing her audience, losing control of the narrative. She screamed out, her voice shrill and piercing. "He is drunk, look at him. He is walking away because he knows he is wrong. He just insulted my parents. He called my mother trash. He is ruining everything." The whispers grew louder. I could feel the eyes of 150 people boring into my back. "Can you believe him? What a terrible father. Poor Jason." They judged me based on her lies. They judged me without knowing I was bleeding inside. I kept walking. I didn't stop to defend myself. I didn't turn around to scream the truth. They wouldn't listen anyway. They wanted the show. Jason's voice followed me, desperate and angry. "Dad, if you walk out those doors, don't bother coming back. You hear me? Don't come back until you have those keys." I reached the double doors of the ballroom. I pushed them open and stepped out into the lobby. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, muffling the noise of the party, muffling the shouts of my son. I was alone, in the quiet elegance of the hotel lobby. I walked out the front entrance. The valet saw me and ran to get my car. I stood on the curb, and the night wind hit me hard. It was biting and cold, stinging my eyes, slapping my skin. But it felt honest. Unlike the warmth inside that ballroom, the cold out here was real. The valet pulled up in my old Lincoln. I tipped him, got in, and shut the door. The silence of the car wrapped around me. I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dark street ahead. I touched my cheek. It was still hot. I wasn't just sad. I was done being sad. A cold, hard resolve was settling in my gut. They wanted the keys. They wanted the house. They wanted to erase me. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady now. I didn't call Jason. I didn't call a friend to cry on their shoulder. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, a number I hoped I would never have to use. I waited for the connection, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, looking at the hotel that held the people who had betrayed me. I wasn't going home to cry. I was about to burn their world to the ground. The leather steering wheel of my Lincoln Town Car felt cool under my palms, but my hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip it. It wasn't the tremors of old age, and it certainly wasn't fear. It was a pure white-hot rage that started in the pit of my stomach and radiated out to my fingertips. I sat there in the dark parking lot, the engine idling with a low rumble that usually soothed me, but tonight it offered no comfort. Through the tinted windshield, I could see the glowing entrance of the Pierre, the doormen in their tails, ushering in guests, the golden light spilling out onto the sidewalk. Inside that building, my son was likely drinking my champagne and apologizing to his friends for his father's behavior. Inside that building, a woman I had welcomed into my family had just slapped me across the face because I refused to be homeless in my own city. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heart rate. The doctor had warned me about stress about my blood pressure, but right now I didn't care about my health. I cared about survival. I cared about justice. I reached into the inside pocket of my tuxedo jacket and pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the dim interior of the car. My thumb hovered over the contact list. I could have called the police. Assault is a crime even if it happens at a wedding, even if it is family. I could have marched back in there with 2 officers and had Tiffany arrested in her Vera Wang gown. But that would have been messy. That would have been a scandal for the tabloids. And frankly, it would have been too easy. Tiffany didn't deserve the mercy of the law. She deserved something far more permanent. She deserved to lose the one thing she actually loved. I scrolled past Jason's name. I scrolled past the names of friends who were currently inside eating the sea bass I had paid for. I stopped at a name that sat at the very bottom of my favorites list. Veronica Sterling. I pressed the call button. It was Saturday night. Most people would be at dinner or watching a movie or sleeping. But not Veronica. I knew exactly where she was. She was in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Caldwell and Associates building, likely reviewing contracts or intimidating a rival firm over email. She didn't have a family. She didn't have hobbies. She had the law, and she had an undying loyalty to the company we built together. The phone rang once, twice. "Harrison?" Her voice was crisp, clear, and devoid of sleepiness. She didn't ask how the wedding was. She didn't offer pleasantries. She knew that if I was calling her personal line at 9 o'clock on a Saturday, the world had tilted on its axis. "Veronica," I said, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. "I need you." "Where are you?" she asked immediately. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background. She was already working. "I am in the parking lot of the Pierre," I said. "I am sitting in my car." "Is it Jason?" she asked. She always knew. Veronica had never trusted my son. She had never liked him. She called him the prince behind his back, and not in a complimentary way. She saw his weakness, his entitlement, long before I was willing to admit it. And Tiffany Veronica terrified Tiffany. My daughter-in-law called her the Iron Viper. She told Jason that Veronica was an evil witch who wanted to control the company. They didn't understand that Veronica was the only reason they had a trust fund to drain in the first place. "It is all of them," I said, staring at the hotel entrance. "Veronica, do you remember the conversation we had 5 years ago after Martha's funeral?" The typing stopped. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "I remember every conversation we have ever had, Harrison," she replied softly. "Do you remember the fail-safe?" I asked. "The document we drafted, but never notarized, the one we hoped would stay in the vault forever." "I have it on my screen right now," she said. "I pulled it up the moment I saw your name on the caller ID." I closed my eyes. "Activate Protocol 19. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Protocol 19. It sounded like a spy movie term, but it was far more dangerous. It was a legal nuclear option. When Martha died, I fell into a deep depression. I was vulnerable. Veronica, in her infinite wisdom, sat me down and forced me to create a protection plan. She said, "Harry, grief makes people do stupid things with money, and grief makes sharks circle the water." So we created Protocol 19. It was a clause in the family trust that gave the founder me absolute, immediate, and irrevocable power to claw back all assets, freeze all accounts, and terminate all employment contracts of any beneficiary who acted against the interest of the founder. It was designed to protect me from being declared incompetent. It was designed to stop a hostile takeover from within the family. "Harry," Veronica said, her voice dropping an octave, "you know what this means. Once I execute this, there is no going back. It freezes everything. The credit cards, the bank accounts, the housing allowances, the car leases. It strips Jason of his title. It locks them out of the corporate servers. It is the financial guillotine. I know, I said. Do it. Did they hurt you, Harry? Her voice had a dangerous edge to it now. The viper was waking up. I touched my cheek. It was still tender. She slapped me, Veronica. In front of everyone, she demanded the keys to the penthouse for her parents. And when I refused, she struck me. And my son told me to give her what she wanted to keep the peace. That little... Veronica cut herself off. I heard the sound of keys being gathered. I heard the sound of a heavy door closing. I am leaving the office now. I am bringing the security team. I am bringing the full legal binder. They are still inside, I said. They are dancing. They are drinking my wine. They think I am just a sad old man who went home to cry. They are about to find out that they just slapped the hand that feeds them, Veronica said. I have already initiated the bank freeze. By the time they try to order another round of drinks, their cards will decline. But Harry, I need you to be ready. This is going to be ugly. Jason will scream. Tiffany will play the victim. They will accuse you of everything under the sun. I am ready, I said. And I was. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold clarity. I remembered the man I used to be before I retired. The man who negotiated steel contracts. The man who fired incompetent managers. I had let that man sleep for too long. I am 20 minutes away, Veronica said. I am bringing the papers for you to sign. Do not go back in there alone. Do not engage with them until I arrive. Stay in the car. Keep your head cold, Harry. We are going to take back everything. Veronica, I asked before she hung up. Yes, Harry. Bring the eviction notices for the penthouse, too. I have a feeling I am going to need them tonight. Consider it done, she said. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at the hotel again. I could imagine the scene inside. Tiffany was probably telling her friends how awful I was. Jason was probably complaining to his best man about his stubborn father. They were celebrating their victory. I leaned my head back against the seat and waited. Protocol 19 was active. The gears of the Caldwell legal machine were starting to turn. My son thought I was powerless. He thought I was just a checkbook with a pulse. He had forgotten that before I was his father, I was a shark. And he had just spilled blood in the water. I watched the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Then I saw them. 3 black SUVs turned the corner and pulled up to the valet stand, ignoring the line of taxis. They looked like government vehicles. They looked like trouble. The doors opened, and a woman stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was 55 years old, but she moved with the energy of a woman half her age. She wore a sharp black suit that cost more than Tiffany's wedding dress. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a phone in the other. She didn't look at the valet. She didn't look at the tourists. She scanned the parking lot until her eyes locked on my Lincoln. Veronica Sterling had arrived. And for the first time all night I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a general who just saw the cavalry crest the hill. I opened my car door and stepped out into the cold night air to meet her. The time for grieving was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. I sat in the darkness of my Lincoln, the engine off now to conserve fuel, though the heat from my rage was enough to keep me warm. Veronica was on her way. The cavalry was coming. But 20 minutes is a long time when your mind is racing with betrayal. I looked down at the iPad I kept in the glove compartment for checking job site blueprints. My finger hovered over the app for the penthouse security system. I had installed it 3 years ago, mostly to keep an eye on the cleaning staff and to make sure the temperature controls were working properly for the wine cellar. I had never expected to use it to spy on my own family. But tonight, a gnawing suspicion in my gut told me I needed to look. Tiffany had demanded the keys with such urgency, such entitlement, and Jason had been so desperate for me to hand them over. I tapped the icon. The screen loaded, spinning a small white circle in the center of the black void. Connect. Connect. The feed popped up, and my breath caught in my throat so hard I started to cough. The penthouse should have been dark. It should have been silent. The only thing moving should have been the dust motes dancing in the moonlight, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Instead, every light in the living room was blazing. I zoomed in, pinching the screen with trembling fingers. There were people in my house. Not burglars in ski masks. It was worse. It was the Dubois family. Tiffany's parents, Robert and Linda, and her older brother, Duke. I stared at the screen, trying to comprehend how they got in. The front door has a biometric lock and a keypad code. I had never given them the code. Only 3 people knew it. Me, my housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, and Jason. My son had given them the code. He hadn't just pressured me for the keys in the ballroom. He had already given them access behind my back. He had betrayed my security before the wedding cake was even cut. I watched horrified as Robert Dubois, a man who had declared bankruptcy twice and borrowed money from me for his tuxedo rental, stood by my custom-built walnut bar. He was holding a bottle of wine. I recognized the label even on the small screen. It was a Chateau Margaux 1982. A bottle worth thousands of dollars. A bottle I had bought with Martha on our trip to France, saving it for our 50th anniversary. A date she never lived to see. Robert didn't use a corkscrew properly. He was hacking at the foil with a steak knife from my kitchen. He popped the cork, spilling dark red liquid onto my Persian rug. He didn't care. He didn't even notice. He took a swig directly from the bottle, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, laughing as he said something to his wife. I switched the camera view to the master bedroom. My sanctuary. The room where I had held Martha's hand as she took her last breath. Linda Dubois was there. She had opened the walk-in closet, my wife's closet, the one I had kept exactly as she left it, with her scent still lingering on the fabrics. Linda was pulling clothes off the hangers. She was throwing Martha's silk blouses onto the floor like they were rags at a discount bin. Then I saw her pull out the white mink coat. It was the coat I gave Martha for her 60th birthday. She loved that coat. She treated it like a treasure. Linda Dubois put it on. It was too tight for hers, but she forced her arms through the sleeves. She spun around in front of the full-length mirror, preening, posing. I turned up the volume on the iPad. The microphone in the camera picked up her voice clearly. "Look at me, Bob," she shouted toward the living room. "I look like a queen in this thing. Can you believe the old hag kept this locked away?" She smoothed the fur, looking at her reflection with greedy eyes. Then she laughed, a harsh, cackling sound. Honestly, it is a good thing she died. At least now someone with actual style can enjoy this stuff. She probably saved it for church. What a waste. A good thing she died. The words echoed in the small cabin of my car. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. Not tears of sadness. Tears of pure, unadulterated fury. She was wearing my dead wife's coat, standing in my dead wife's bedroom, celebrating her death so she could play dress-up. I switched the camera again. I needed to see where Duke was. Duke was the black sheep of the Dubois family, which was saying something. A gambling addict with a history of petty theft. I found him in my study. He wasn't admiring the view. He was behind my desk. He had moved the painting of the Hudson River School that hung on the north wall. Behind it was my wall safe. Duke was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead, even in the night vision mode. He was holding a screwdriver and a hammer he must have found in the utility drawer. He was trying to pry the digital keypad off the safe door. Inside that safe was cash, yes, about $10,000 in emergency funds. But more importantly, inside that safe was my Patek Philippe watch. The one my father gave me when I graduated from engineering school. The one I intended to give to Jason when he had his first child. Duke wasn't trying to guess the code. He was trying to break it open by brute force. He was hacking at the steel, scratching the finish, desperate for a score. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, swinging the hammer. Bang, bang. I watched them. The father drinking my memories, the mother wearing my grief, the son trying to steal my legacy. They were like locusts. They had swarmed my life, invited in by my own son, and now they were stripping the carcass clean before the body was even cold. They weren't just guests, they were invaders, and they felt entitled to everything. They thought I was just the bankroll, the old fool who would pay the bills and disappear into the background. They thought Jason controlled me, and therefore they controlled Jason. I pressed the record button on the screen. A small red dot appeared in the corner. I recorded Robert spilling the wine. I recorded Linda insulting Martha. I recorded Duke attacking the safe. I needed every second of it. This wasn't just for my peace of mind. This was evidence. This was the ammunition I would use to blow their lives apart. The sadness I had felt in the ballroom was gone completely now. It had been incinerated. In its place was a cold, metallic resolve. I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't a grieving husband. I was a man who was watching his home being violated, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I stopped the recording and saved the file to the cloud. Then I sent a copy to Veronica's secure server. I sent another copy to my private email. I wasn't taking any chances. I looked at the screen one last time. Linda was now going through Martha's jewelry box on the vanity. She was holding up a pearl necklace, testing the weight of it in her hand. "Enjoy it while you can, Linda," I whispered to the empty car. "Because you are about to pay a very high price for that fashion show." I closed the iPad and set it down on the passenger seat. I checked my watch. Veronica would be here in 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the hammer dropped. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked at the caller ID. It was Jason. Of course it was. He probably wanted to know if I had come to my senses. He probably wanted to know if I was bringing the keys back like a good, obedient father. I stared at the phone, watching his picture flash on the screen. It was a photo from his college graduation. We were both smiling. I had my arm around him. He looked so proud, so full of potential. I didn't answer. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear his voice yet. If I spoke to him now, I might say something that would warn him. I might scream. And I needed him to be surprised. I needed him to be blindsided. The ringing stopped. Then a text message popped up. "Dad, stop being childish. Pick up the phone. We need to talk about the house." Childish. I laughed, a short, dry sound in the darkness. He thought this was a tantrum. He thought this was a negotiation. He had no idea that while he was texting me, his in-laws were committing felonies in my living room. He had no idea that he had just handed me the sword I would use to cut him out of my life. I looked back at the hotel. The lights were still bright. The party was still going. But the clock was ticking, and when midnight struck, Jason Caldwell was going to turn into a pumpkin. A broke, homeless pumpkin. I tapped the steering wheel, waiting for the black SUVs to arrive. The anger had settled into a focus so sharp it felt like a weapon. I was ready. Bring on the Viper. Bring on the police. Let's see how much Tiffany likes the penthouse when she is being dragged out of it in handcuffs. The phone in my hand vibrated again, a persistent, angry buzz that demanded attention. It was Jason. The image on the screen was the same, that smiling graduation photo, but the feeling it evoked had changed entirely. 5 minutes ago, looking at it brought a wave of nostalgia. Now it brought a wave of nausea. I stared at it, debating whether to answer. Part of me, the part that was still a father, wanted to ignore it, to drive away and let the lawyers handle the carnage. But the other part, the part of me that had built skyscrapers and negotiated with sharks, knew I needed to hear it. I needed to know exactly where he stood. I needed him to say the quiet part out loud so I could sever the cord without a single ounce of regret. I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I didn't say hello. I didn't say a word. I just listened. The background noise was loud, the thumping bass of the DJ's music, the roar of a party in full swing. But Jason's voice cut through it, slurred and thick with alcohol and entitlement. "Dad, where the hell are you?" he shouted. "I have been looking everywhere. People are asking questions. You are embarrassing me." Again. I looked at the iPad on the passenger seat, where the silent video feed showed his brother-in-law trying to smash open my safe. "You are embarrassed," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That is interesting, Jason, because I am currently watching your in-laws loot my home like common criminals." He didn't even pause. He didn't sound surprised. He didn't deny it. He just huffed a sound of pure exasperation. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," he slurred. "They are just making themselves comfortable. I told them they could stay there. It is not a big deal." "But you walking out on Tiffany, that is a big deal. She is in the bathroom crying her eyes out because of you." "She slapped me, Jason," I reminded him, though I knew it was pointless. "She is under a lot of stress," he yelled, and I could hear the spit hitting the microphone. "You pushed her. You are always pushing. But you know what, I am done playing the nice guy. I am done asking. You need to turn this car around right now. You need to come back in here, get on your knees and apologize to my wife. You need to give her those keys and beg her forgiveness." I gripped the phone tighter. "Or what, Jason?" I asked. "What are you going to do?" There was a pause, a heavy breathing silence on the line. Then his voice dropped. It wasn't the sloppy anger of a drunk man anymore. It was something colder. It was a threat he had been rehearsing. "Or tomorrow morning I am calling Dr. Evans," he said. "I am going to tell him about your episodes, about how you have been forgetting things, how you have been aggressive, how you are not yourself." I frowned. My episodes? I didn't have episodes. I was sharp as a tack. "I am going to file for guardianship." "Dad." Jason said the words sliding out of him like oil. "I have already talked to a lawyer about it. We can prove you are mentally incompetent. You are 70 years old. You are acting erratic. You are hoarding assets. The courts will give me power of attorney, and once I have that, you won't have a say in anything." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment threat. He had talked to a lawyer. He had planned this. He was going to use the legal system, the very system I taught him to respect, to strip me of my rights. And then what I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You lock me away." "We found a place," he said, sounding almost proud of his efficiency. "It is called Shady Pines. It is affordable. It is fine. You will be safe there. You won't have to worry about the penthouse or the money anymore. We will handle the burden." Shady Pines. I knew the place. It was a state-funded facility on the outskirts of the city. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was where people went to wait for death in rooms that smelled of bleach and despair. "And the penthouse?" I asked. "We are selling it," he said bluntly. "We need the cash, Dad. Duke owes some people a lot of money, like $50,000. If he doesn't pay by Monday, they are going to hurt him. Tiffany is terrified. We need to liquidate the asset to cover the family debts." There it was, the naked truth. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Duke, the gambling addict brother-in-law, was in deep with loan sharks, and instead of letting Duke face the consequences of his own actions, Jason was going to sacrifice his father. He was going to declare me insane, lock me in a budget nursing home, and sell my life's work to pay off a criminal's debt. And he was telling me this on his wedding night. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over me, but it wasn't physical. It was the crushing weight of realization. I had done this. I had created this monster. I thought back to when Jason was a boy. When he broke his neighbor's window with a baseball, I paid for it and apologized so he wouldn't get in trouble. When he failed his math class in high school, I hired a private tutor to do the work with him so he wouldn't have to attend summer school. When he totaled his first car, I bought him a safer, newer one the next week because I couldn't bear the thought of him taking the bus. I had smoothed every road. I had cushioned every fall. I had taught him that consequences were things that happened to other people, not to Caldwell's. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was giving him the life I never had. But I was wrong. I hadn't raised a man. I had raised a parasite. I had raised a weak, spineless creature who would cannibalize his own creator rather than stand on his own 2 feet. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a harvest. I was reaping exactly what I had sown for 32 years. But the harvest season was over. The sadness evaporated, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. I opened my eyes and looked at the hotel one last time. I looked at the light spilling from the windows, imagining Jason standing there in his tuxedo, phone pressed to his ear, thinking he held all the cards. He thought he was the king. He thought I was the pawn. He had no idea that the queen was already on the board and she was bringing a sledgehammer. Dad, Jason said, his voice impatient. Are you there? Did you hear me come back and fix this? Or I swear by Monday morning you will be eating Jell-O in a shared room at Shady Pines. I looked at the dashboard clock. Veronica would be here in less than 5 minutes. The police were already en route to the penthouse. The trap was set. I sat up straight. I adjusted my cufflinks. I cleared my throat. I heard you, Jason, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used when I fired a foreman for stealing copper wire. It was the voice of the chairman. Good, he said, mistaking my calmness for submission. So you are coming back. I looked at the rearview mirror, checking my reflection. I didn't look like an incompetent old man. I looked like Harrison Caldwell. I am not coming back to apologize, Jason, I said. What then? What are you doing? I am waiting, I said. Waiting for what? For you to learn the most expensive lesson of your life. Dad, stop speaking in riddles. I am warning you, I cut him off. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I spoke with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. Enjoy the party, son, I said softly. Drink the wine, eat the cake, dance with your wife, because this is it. This is the last party you will ever be invited to. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear him shouting something, a tinny, desperate sound coming from the small speaker. Dad, Dad, don't you hang up on me. I pressed the red button. The call ended. The silence returned to the car, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with anticipation. I put the phone back in my pocket. I watched the entrance of the hotel. I saw the headlights of the SUVs turning into the driveway. They moved in a convoy, sleek and dark and purposeful. Veronica was here. I opened the door of my Lincoln and stepped out onto the pavement. I buttoned my jacket. I took a deep breath of the cold city air. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a scared old man. I was the storm, and I was about to make landfall. The Lincoln felt like a bunker now, a steel cage protecting me from the absurdity of the world outside. I checked my watch. Veronica was still 10 minutes away. 10 minutes is an eternity when your blood is boiling, but in the world of high-stakes corporate finance, 10 minutes is enough time to destroy an empire, or in this case, to uncover exactly how mine was being dismantled. I reached into the leather satchel on the passenger seat and pulled out my laptop. It was an old, heavy ThinkPad, the kind that prioritizes processing power over sleek aesthetics. Jason had laughed at it once, telling me I needed a tablet, something lighter, something modern. He didn't understand that this machine held the keys to the kingdom. When I stepped down as CEO of Caldwell & Associates, I handed over the title, the corner office, and the public responsibilities. But I absolutely never handed over the root admin access to the company servers. I was the architect of the digital infrastructure, just as I was the architect of the skyscrapers we built. I left a back door that only I knew about, a God mode that allowed me to see everything, access everything, and override everything. I opened the laptop, the screen glowing blue in the darkness of the car. I connected to the secure server via the encrypted dongle I always carried. The login prompt blinked at me. User founder Zhao Xuan. I typed in the password, a string of 32 random characters I had memorized years ago. Access granted. I wasn't looking for construction schedules or architectural blueprints. I was following the money. Specifically, I was following the money flowing through the black card I had given Jason 3 years ago. It was supposed to be for business development and essential lifestyle maintenance. I had set a generous limit, assuming my son had the good sense to use it wisely. I pulled up the real-time transaction log, the screen filled with lines of data, a waterfall of spending. I scrolled past the expected extravagances. The dinners at Nobu, the suits from Tom Ford, the weekend trips to the Hamptons. Those were annoying symptoms of a spoiled child, but they weren't crimes. They were just the cost of doing business with a son who liked to play the part of a tycoon without doing the work. But then the patterns started to emerge. Anomalies. I saw a recurring payment to a vendor listed as Dubois Consulting Group. It sounded legitimate enough on the surface. A consulting firm. Maybe Jason was getting advice on management. But the amounts were erratic. $5,000 one week, $12,000 the next, $8,000 on a Tuesday. I clicked on the vendor details. The system pulled up the registered address and tax ID. My heart hammered against my ribs. The address wasn't a glass office tower in Midtown. It was a residential address in Queens. A rundown duplex. I knew that address. I had sent a Christmas card there last year. It was the home of Robert and Linda Dubois, Tiffany's parents. I dug deeper. I pulled up the invoices attached to the payments. They were laughable. Strategic life coaching. Interior design consultation. Event planning services. Dubois Consulting was a ghost. It was a shell company set up solely to siphon money out of my company expenses and straight into the pockets of my in-laws. In the last 6 months alone, Jason had transferred $50,000 to them. $50,000. That wasn't support. That was a salary for doing absolutely nothing. He was putting his father-in-law on my payroll under the guise of business expenses. He was funding their lifestyle, their booze, their bad investments, all while I was paying for the wedding. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This was tax fraud. This was embezzlement. If the IRS audited us, they wouldn't just fine us. They would look at me as the source of the funds. But I wasn't done. I kept scrolling. I found a series of transactions from last month labeled Sapphire Services LLC in Las Vegas. The category code was flagged as entertainment, hospitality. The amount was $20,000. I ran a quick search on the merchant ID. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a restaurant. It was a debt collection agency that specialized in casino markers. Duke. Tiffany's brother wasn't just a casual gambler. He was in deep. And Jason had used the corporate card, my card, to pay off a $20,000 gambling debt for his brother-in-law. He had literally taken money from the company accounts to pay off loan sharks in Nevada. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. The stupidity was staggering. The arrogance was blinding. Jason thought he was invisible. He thought because he was the CEO's son, nobody would check the line items. He thought the accounting department reported to him. He forgot they reported to the board. And the board reported to me. But the worst was yet to come. I navigated away from the credit card statements and into the legal confidential folder on the server. This was where Jason kept his personal contracts, thinking they were safe behind the corporate firewall. I saw a file created just 3 days ago. It was titled J&T Loan Agreement V4.pdf. I opened it. It was a legal document drafted not by our company lawyers, but by some storefront attorney in Brooklyn. It was a promissory note. I, Jason Caldwell, hereby acknowledge a personal debt to Tiffany Dubois in the amount of $5 million, $1,000 for consulting services rendered and emotional support provided during the course of our relationship. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning. $5 million. For emotional support, I scrolled to the clauses at the bottom. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, this debt shall take precedence over any prenuptial agreements or family trust stipulations. This debt is secured by the assets of the signatory, including future inheritances and stock options. I understood immediately what this was. It was a poison pill. It was a laundering scheme. Jason knew the family trust was ironclad. He knew that if he divorced Tiffany, she would get nothing from the trust assets because they were in my name. So they had manufactured a fake debt. If they got divorced, or if I tried to cut him off, he could claim he owed her this money. He could force the liquidation of assets to pay this fake debt, effectively bypassing the trust's protections and handing her $5 million of my money tax-free. It was brilliant in a twisted criminal way. And it was proof of conspiracy. This wasn't just Tiffany manipulating him. Jason had signed it. His digital signature was right there at the bottom, dated 48 hours ago. He had actively conspired with his wife to defraud his own father and the family estate. He wasn't a victim. He was a co-conspirator. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain anymore. It was the feeling of a heavy burden being lifted. For years I had worried about Jason. I had worried that he wasn't smart enough, that he wasn't tough enough. I had worried that if I died, the wolves would eat him alive. I was wrong. Jason was the wolf. He was the one trying to eat me. I closed the file and dragged the entire folder onto my secure desktop. I created a backup copy and sent it to an external server I kept in Switzerland. Then I sent a copy directly to Veronica's inbox with the subject line, "The Smoking Gun." I had enough. I didn't just have grounds to disinherit him. I didn't just have grounds to fire him. I had enough evidence to indict him. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit money laundering. I looked at the dashboard clock. Veronica would be here in 2 minutes. I shut the laptop with a snap. The sound was final, like a judge's gavel. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. I looked tired. I looked old. But I also looked dangerous. I had walked out of that hotel feeling like a discarded father. I was about to walk back in as the CEO of Caldwell & Associates, and I was going to conduct the most aggressive hostile takeover in the history of this family. I wasn't just taking back the keys to the penthouse. I was taking back my company. I was taking back my name. And I was taking back my dignity. I saw the headlights of the SUVs sweep across the parking lot. The cavalry had arrived. I put the laptop back in the bag and opened the car door. The cold air hit me again, but this time it felt like fuel. Jason wanted a war. He wanted to play legal games. He was about to find out why they called his father the bulldozer in the 80s. I didn't just move obstacles. I buried them. The headlights of the approaching convoy cut through the darkness of the parking lot like searchlights on a prison wall. 3 black Cadillac Escalades moved in perfect formation, their tires crunching over the asphalt with a heavy, expensive sound. They did not wait for the valet to direct them. They did not circle the lot looking for a space. They pulled directly up to the curb, blocking the main entrance of the Pierre, displacing a line of yellow taxis and a confused limousine driver who honked his horn once before falling silent under the glare of the lead vehicle. This was not a social call. This was an invasion force. I watched from the driver's seat of my Lincoln, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The anger that had been boiling in my veins for the last hour had cooled into something solid and sharp like tempered steel. I placed the laptop back into its leather bag, closed the door on the digital evidence of my son's crimes, and stepped out into the night air. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. From the rear vehicles emerged 6 men. They were large, dressed in identical black suits that strained against their shoulders. They wore earpieces and the distinct scanning expressions of men who used to work for the Secret Service or Special Forces. These were not the hotel's polite security staff. These were private contractors Veronica kept on retainer for hostile takeovers and high-risk terminations. They fanned out, securing the perimeter around the lead vehicle, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the hotel entrance from festive to severe. Then the rear door of the lead SUV opened. A pair of black stilettos hit the pavement with a sharp, decisive click. Veronica Sterling stepped out. She looked exactly as I knew she would. Immaculate. Terrifying. She wore a charcoal gray power suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. Her silver hair was pulled back into a knot so tight it looked painful. In her hand, she held a thick leather binder. She didn't look at the confused valets. She didn't look at the flashing lights of the city. Her eyes found mine, immediately locking onto me with a laser focus that had withered opposing counsel for 3 decades. Behind her, 4 more people exited the vehicle. I recognized them all. There was Marcus, the head of our litigation department. There was Sarah, a forensic accountant who could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar ledger, and 2 junior associates who looked terrified but ready to work. This was the War Council. I walked toward them. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was straight. As I approached, Veronica's eyes softened just a fraction, a microscopic crack in the armor that only I would notice. She scanned my face, lingering for a second on the red mark on my cheek where Tiffany had slapped me. Her jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping near her ear. "You look like hell, Harry," she said, her voice low and devoid of sympathy, which was exactly what I needed. Sympathy would have broken me. Her cold assessment just made me stronger. "I feel like I just woke up from a 30-year coma," I replied. She nodded, accepting the answer. She didn't offer a hug. She offered me the binder. It was heavy, weighing at least 5 pounds. "Here it is," she said, tapping the leather cover with a manicured fingernail. "The emergency court order." I woke up Judge Harrison. He wasn't happy, but once I sent him the evidence of the unauthorized transfers and the prenup fraud, he signed it electronically from his living room. "It grants you immediate temporary conservatorship over the family trust assets pending a full hearing. It gives us the legal authority to freeze everything, seize everything, and evict anyone occupying trust property." I took the binder. It felt like holding a loaded gun. "And the police?" I asked. "They are already at the penthouse," Veronica said. "My contact at the precinct said they are executing the warrant for criminal trespass and felony vandalism as we speak. We will see that footage shortly. But right now, our priority is the ballroom." I looked past her toward the revolving gold doors of the hotel. I could hear the muffled thump of the bass from the wedding band. I could imagine them inside. Jason was probably making a toast. Tiffany was probably dancing, the train of her dress swirling around her, thinking she was the Queen of New York. They were celebrating their victory over the old man. They were spending money they didn't have, living a life they hadn't earned, confident that I would eventually cave, that I would come crawling back with the keys and an apology. They had no idea that the Reaper was standing on their doorstep. "Are you ready for this?" Harry, Veronica asked. "Once we walk through those doors, there is no going back. You are not just crashing a wedding. You are dismantling your son's life in front of 150 witnesses. It will be brutal. It will be public. And he will never forgive you." I thought about the phone call. I thought about Jason threatening to lock me in a state facility. I thought about him paying off a gambling debt with my company funds while telling me I was incompetent. I thought about the slap. "He made his choice," I said, my voice steady. He chose the money over the man. Now he gets to see what happens when the money fights back. Veronica nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. Then let us go inside. I adjusted my tuxedo jacket. I checked my cufflinks. I ran a hand through my hair. I wanted to look impeccable. I wanted them to see exactly who they had underestimated. Veronica turned to the security team. Secure the exits, she ordered. No one leaves until we have recovered the corporate credit cards and any other company assets. If the groom tries to make a scene, contain him. But do not touch him unless he becomes physically violent. Is that clear? Clear, the lead guard rumbled. She turned to the legal team. You four flank us. Have the documents ready to serve. If anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to intervene, you cite the court order. I want this surgical. I stepped up beside her. We stood there for a moment, a phalanx of black suits against the golden glow of the hotel. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, dark power that I hadn't felt since my days in the boardroom facing down hostile takeovers. I wasn't just Harrison Caldwell, the retired father. I was the chairman. I was the founder. And I was about to conduct the most hostile takeover of my life. Let us go take out the trash, I said. We moved forward. The valets scrambled to get out of our way. The doorman, seeing the look on Veronica's face and the size of the men behind us, wisely decided not to ask for invitations. They pulled the heavy doors open, and we stepped into the lobby. The air inside was warm and smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. The sound of the party grew louder. We marched across the marble floor, our footsteps echoing like the drums of war. Guests in the lobby stopped and stared. They whispered behind their hands. They sensed the danger radiating off us. We didn't stop. We didn't acknowledge them. We headed straight for the double doors of the grand ballroom. I could hear the DJ's voice over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the dance floor. The happy couple, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell. Applause erupted inside. Cheering. I reached the doors. I didn't push them open gently. I didn't hesitate. I nodded to the two largest security guards. They stepped forward, grabbed the brass handles, and threw the doors wide open with a force that banged them against the walls. The sound was like a thunderclap. The applause faltered. Heads turned. And there we stood. Not a sad, lonely father coming to beg for forgiveness, but a firing squad. I stepped into the room, Veronica at my right hand, the army at my back. The lights from the chandeliers hit us, casting long shadows across the dance floor. I locked eyes with Jason across the room. He was holding a microphone, a glass of champagne in his other hand, a smile frozen on his face. The music didn't stop immediately, but the energy in the room died instantly. It was the silence of a predator entering a clearing. I took the first step onto the parquet floor. The invasion had begun. The heavy brass doors slammed against the ballroom walls with a violence that vibrated through the floorboards. But for a split second, the party inside didn't stop. The momentum of celebration is a powerful thing. The band was midway through a swing number. The waiters were weaving through tables with trays of filet mignon, and on the raised stage, bathed in a spotlight that cost more than my first car, Tiffany stood with a microphone in one hand and a fresh glass of champagne in the other. I stood in the doorway, flanked by Veronica and my wall of security, and I watched the final moments of my daughter-in-law's triumph. She hadn't noticed us yet. She was too busy basking in the adoration of the crowd. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the diamonds around her neck catching the light. She brought the microphone to her lips, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the room. "Oh, don't worry about Harry, everyone. He just got a little tired. You know how it is with people his age. They get confused. They get emotional. He probably just went home to take his medicine and go to bed." A ripple of laughter went through the room. It wasn't malicious laughter from everyone, just that uncomfortable, polite chuckle people give when they want to smooth over an awkward moment. But Jason was laughing harder than anyone. He was standing right next to her, nodding, validating her cruelty. He was letting her paint me as a senile invalid to explain why I had walked out on his wedding. He was selling my dignity for a few cheap laughs. Then the drummer saw us. He was the first to stop. The rhythm faltered, a chaotic stumble of beats, and then silence. The piano player looked up, saw the grim expression on the faces of the 6 men in black suits, and lifted his hands from the keys as if they were red hot. The music died, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the echo of Tiffany's last words hanging in the sudden void. Tiffany frowned, tapping the microphone. "Hey, why did the music stop? We are just getting started." She followed the gaze of the crowd. One by one, heads turned toward the entrance. 150 faces pivoted to see what had killed the party. And there I was, not the sad, defeated old man they expected, but a man standing at the head of an army. I stepped further into the room. My shoes clicked loudly on the parquet floor. Veronica matched my stride, her briefcase clutched like a weapon. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. I scanned the tables as I walked. This wasn't just a wedding for family and friends. This was a networking event. Half the guests were business associates, partners from construction firms, suppliers, even a few city council members I had worked with over the years. These were people who knew the industry, and more importantly, they knew the players. I saw the moment of recognition hit them. It started at table 4, where the CEO of Manhattan Steel sat. He dropped his fork. His eyes went wide, darting from me to the woman beside me. He leaned over to his wife and whispered loud enough for the silence to carry it. "Oh my God. That is Veronica Sterling." The whisper spread like a contagion. Veronica Sterling, the Iron Viper. Why is the General Counsel here? Why does she have security? This isn't a toast. This is a raid. I saw the color drain from the faces of men who had faced Veronica across a negotiation table. They knew that Veronica didn't attend social functions. She didn't do weddings. If Veronica Sterling walked into a room with a legal team, it meant someone was about to lose everything. They stopped eating. They put down their drinks. They instinctively pulled away from the head table, distancing themselves from the blast zone. Jason finally saw us. He was standing on the edge of the stage, his glass halfway to his mouth. He froze. He looked at me, then at the security guards, then at Veronica. For a second, he looked like a confused child. But then the entitlement kicked in. The arrogance I had fostered for 30 years surged to the surface. He slammed his glass down on the table, shattering the stem. He jumped off the stage, his face twisting into a mask of furious indignation. He stormed toward us, his tuxedo jacket flapping open. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "What the hell is this? Who are these people? You bring goons to my wedding. Are you insane?" He was coming at me fast, hands balled into fists. He wasn't going to hit me. I knew that. He was going to get in my face. He was going to try to intimidate me like he had on the phone. He was going to try to assert dominance in front of his wife. But he never got the chance. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. 2 of the security contractors stepped forward. They moved with a fluid, practiced speed that made Jason look slow and clumsy. They didn't strike him. They simply became a wall. They stepped into his path, shoulder to shoulder, blocking him completely. Jason slammed into them. It was like running into a concrete pillar. He stumbled back, winded. "Get out of my way!" he screamed, trying to push past them. "Do you know who I am? I am Jason Caldwell. I am the CEO of this company." The lead guard, a man named Davis who had a scar running through his eyebrow, looked down at Jason with zero emotion. "Sir, please step back." "I am not stepping back," Jason yelled, spittle flying from his mouth. "I want them out, Dad. Tell your dogs to back off right now, or I swear to God I will call the police." You don't need to call them, Jason," I said calmly. My voice wasn't loud, but in the silence of the room it carried perfectly. "They are already busy at the penthouse." Jason froze. What? While he was processing that, Veronica made her move. She didn't stop for Jason. She didn't even look at him. She walked past the scuffle, past the stunned guests, and headed straight for the stage. Her heels hammered a rhythm of impending doom on the wooden stairs. Tiffany was still standing there, holding the microphone, looking frozen in shock. She looked at Veronica approaching her like a deer watching a speeding truck. She tried to say something, tried to regain her composure. "Excuse me," she stammered into the mic. "Who do you think you are? This is a private event." Veronica didn't answer. She walked right up to Tiffany. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She simply reached out and took the microphone from Tiffany's hand. It wasn't a violent snatch. It was a transfer of power. Tiffany let go because she was too terrified to hold on. Veronica Sterling up close was a force of nature that a 28-year-old social climber had no defenses against. Veronica turned to face the crowd. She tapped the microphone once. Thump! The sound echoed through the ballroom, marking the end of the celebration and the beginning of the execution. She placed her leather binder on the podium, right on top of Jason's prepared speech notes. She opened it, the snap of the metal rings loud and crisp. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the business partners, the friends, the family. She waited until the silence was absolute, until the only sound was Jason's heavy breathing from the floor where the guards held him back. "Ladies and gentlemen," Veronica said, her voice cool, professional, and terrifyingly calm. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Veronica Sterling. I am the Chief Legal Officer for the Caldwell Family Trust and the Acting Executor of the Caldwell Estate Assets." A gasp went through the room. The guests knew what that meant. The executor only stepped in when something was catastrophically wrong. Tiffany found her voice. She stepped forward, trying to grab the mic back, trying to salvage her spotlight. "You can't be up here. This is my wedding. Get off my stage." Veronica turned her head slowly to look at Tiffany. It was a look of such withering condescension that Tiffany actually took a step back. "Mrs. Caldwell," Veronica said, though the title sounded like an insult coming from her, "I am afraid you are mistaken. This is not your stage. This hotel ballroom was rented with funds from the Caldwell Corporation. The food, the wine, the flowers, the dress you are wearing. Every single molecule of this event was paid for by the man your husband just threatened to institutionalize." Tiffany went pale. Her eyes darted to Jason, looking for help. But Jason was powerless, walled off by my security detail. Veronica turned back to the crowd. She held up a document from the binder. It was a single sheet of paper stamped with the seal of the New York State Supreme Court. "I am here to enforce an emergency order," she announced, "due to gross misconduct, conspiracy to defraud, and acts of violence against the founder. Harrison Caldwell, we have initiated immediate asset recovery protocols." She paused, letting the words sink in. "As of 5 minutes ago, all corporate accounts associated with Jason Caldwell and Tiffany Dubois have been frozen. The credit cards used to secure this venue have been deactivated. The transfer of funds for the catering and entertainment has been reversed." She looked directly at the hotel manager, who was standing by the kitchen doors looking ready to faint. "Mr. Manager," Veronica said politely, "the check for this event just bounced. This party is no longer paid for. Unless Mr. Jason Caldwell has a personal debit card with $250,000 on it, I suggest you stop serving the champagne." The room erupted into chaos. Waiters stopped mid-step. The manager started speaking frantically into his radio. Guests began to stand up, sensing that the free ride was over. Veronica wasn't done. She looked down at Jason, who was staring up at her with a look of pure horror. "This party is terminated," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before the hotel security removes you for trespassing. And Jason, do not try to call a car service. Your corporate Uber account has been suspended too. You are walking home." The room was already spinning from Veronica's announcement, But she was not finished. She was not a lawyer who believed in leaving things to the imagination. She believed in evidence. She believed in the brutal, undeniable power of proof. Without saying a word, she turned to the AV technician, who was cowering behind his mixing board. She didn't need to threaten him. She simply pointed to the HDMI cable that was dangling from the podium, the one meant to display a slideshow of Jason and Tiffany's romantic journey. The technician scrambled to hand it to her. Veronica plugged it into her tablet. Behind us, a giant screen began to descend from the ceiling. It was 20 feet wide, designed to show happy couples frolicking on beaches or cutting cakes. Tonight, it would show a horror movie. The projector hummed to life. A beam of light cut through the dim ballroom, illuminating the dust motes before hitting the canvas. The image flickered for a second, then sharpened into focus. It was black and white footage. It was grainy, but the resolution was high enough to see every eyelash, every bead of sweat. It was the security footage from the hotel lobby, time-stamped just 45 minutes ago. A hush fell over the room, deeper and heavier than before. On the screen, they saw me standing by the bar. They saw Tiffany approach. They saw her lean in, whispering. There was no audio on this feed, but the body language screamed aggression. They saw her finger poking my chest. They saw me step back, trying to de-escalate. And then they saw it. The slap. On the giant screen, it looked even more violent. Her arm drew back and whipped forward with a speed that blurred the frame. My head snapped to the side. The force of the blow was visible in the way my body recoiled. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of 150 people realizing they had been lied to. Tiffany had told them I was drunk. She had told them I insulted her. But the video showed a calm old man being assaulted by a woman in a wedding dress. I looked at the guests. Their hands were over their mouths. They were looking from the screen to Tiffany with expressions of disgust. The mask had slipped. The blushing bride was gone, replaced by the violent bully she really was. Tiffany stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked around, desperate to find an excuse, but the evidence was 20 feet tall and playing on a loop. But Veronica was not done. She swiped her finger across the tablet. The image on the screen changed. It went from the static shot of the lobby to a handheld shaky camera view. The quality jumped to 4K color. It was a live stream. At the bottom of the screen in red letters, it read, "Live feed NYPD body cam." The audio blasted through the ballroom speakers, loud and distorted by the feedback. Sirens, shouting, the heavy thud of boots on hardwood floors. It was my penthouse, my living room. Police officers were swarming the space. In the center of the frame, face down on my Persian rug, was Robert Dubois, Tiffany's father. His hands were being wrenched behind his back by a burly officer. He was screaming about police brutality, his voice slurring from the vintage wine he had stolen. The camera panned left. There was Linda Dubois. She was still wearing my dead wife's mink coat. She was hysterical, clawing at a female officer who was trying to handcuff her. "Get your hands off me," Linda shrieked, her voice amplified to deafening levels in the ballroom. "Do you know who my daughter is? She owns this place. She is marrying the owner. You are under arrest for felony trespassing and grand larceny," the officer shouted back, spinning Linda around and slamming her against the wall. "You have the right to remain silent." The camera whipped around again. It showed the door to my study. It had been kicked open. Inside, 2 officers were dragging Duke out. He was fighting, kicking, holding onto my safe with one hand as if it could save him. A pry bar clattered to the floor. "That is my money," Duke yelled. "He owes me." The chaos on the screen was absolute. It was a raid. It was the total dismantling of the Dubois family dignity. The guests in the ballroom watched in horrified fascination. They saw the spilled wine staining the carpets. They saw the clothes of my late wife scattered in the hallway. They saw the reality of the people they were celebrating. These were not respectable in-laws. These were looters. These were criminals who had broken into an old man's home while he was paying for their dinner. I looked at Jason. He was staring up at the screen, his neck craned back, his face drained of all blood. He looked like a corpse standing upright. He was watching his mother-in-law being arrested in a stolen coat. He was watching his father-in-law being dragged out in handcuffs. He knew. In that moment, he knew that I knew everything. He knew about the code. He knew about the betrayal. He saw the consequences of his weakness played out in high definition for all his friends and business partners to see. His knees buckled, and he actually grabbed the edge of the stage to keep from collapsing. Tiffany let out a scream that tore her throat. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure narcissistic rage. "Turn it off!" she shrieked, lunging toward Veronica. "Turn it off right now! You are ruining everything, you bastard!" She tried to climb the stairs to the stage, her fingers curled into claws, ready to scratch, ready to hurt. But she never made it. Veronica didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from her tablet. She simply nodded to the security team. 2 guards stepped in front of Tiffany. They didn't touch her. They just stood there, massive and immovable. She slammed into them, beating her fists against their chests, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. "I hate you," she screamed, looking past the guards at me. "I hate you. You selfish old man. It is my house. Jason said it was mine." The video feed continued to play. On screen, Linda Dubois was now being marched out the front door of the penthouse, weeping, the mink coat slipping off her shoulders to reveal the cheap dress underneath. I walked past Jason. He didn't try to stop me. He couldn't even look at me. I walked up the stairs to the stage. I stood next to Veronica. I looked down at Tiffany, who was now sobbing, held back by the guards, her makeup running down her face in black streaks. I reached out and took the microphone from the podium. I held it to my lips. The room went silent again, except for the sound of the police sirens coming from the speakers and Tiffany's jagged breathing. "Tiffany," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the man who owned the building, the man who paid the bills, the man who was finally finished. She looked up at me, her eyes wild with hate. "You wanted the keys?" I asked. I pointed to the giant screen behind me where an officer was currently locking the front door of my penthouse and putting a yellow police seal over the jam. "The police have them now," I said. "They are tagging them as evidence in a felony investigation." I paused, letting the words sink in. "If you want them, you can go down to the precinct. I am sure they will let you see them, right after they process your parents for breaking and entering." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. The feedback squealed, a sharp, piercing noise that signaled the end of the show. I turned to Veronica. She closed her binder with a snap. She tapped the tablet, and the screen went black, plunging the room back into the dim, romantic lighting that now felt grotesque. "Let us go," I said to her. We walked down the stairs. We walked past Tiffany, who had collapsed onto the floor in a pile of white tulle and misery. We walked past Jason, who was still clinging to the stage, staring at the blank screen, as if he could still see his life crumbling on it. We walked through the silent crowd of guests who parted for us like the Red Sea. No one said a word. No one tried to stop us. They were too busy processing the fact that they had just witnessed a public execution. I walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the whispers. I didn't care about the scandal. I had my dignity back. And as I stepped out into the night air, I realized something else. I had my life back. The silence that had fallen over the banquet hall was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that usually precedes a violent storm. I stood at the podium, my hands resting firmly on the wood, looking down at the chaos I had just unleashed. For years I had been the silent provider, the old man in the background writing checks and smoothing over mistakes, but tonight the checkbook was closed and the ink had run dry. I watched as the reality of my words began to sink into the minds of the two people standing before me. It started with a tremor in Tiffany's hands. She dropped the champagne flute she had been holding, and the glass shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot. That sound seemed to break the spell. Tiffany turned to Jason. Her face, which had been a mask of triumphant arrogance just minutes before, was now twisted into a grotesque expression of panic and dawning horror. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive white tuxedo jacket, bunching the fabric in her fists, shaking him with a strength I did not know she possessed. Her voice rose to a shriek that made the guests in the front row flinch. "You told me you owned the company," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me he was just a figurehead, a senile old man who just signed the papers you put in front of him. Do something, Jason. Fix this. Tell him to stop lying." Jason looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He tried to pry her hands off his jacket, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape, looking for an ally, but finding only the judgmental stares of 300 guests. I waited. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own deception. He stammered, his face flushing a deep, embarrassing red. He tried to laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound that fooled absolutely no one. "Baby, calm down," he said, his voice trembling. "Dad is just having one of his episodes. You know how he gets. He is confused. I handle everything. I run the business. This is just a misunderstanding." I leaned into the microphone. My voice was calm, steady, and amplified to reach every corner of the room. "There is no confusion, Jason. The only misunderstanding here is the one you created when you convinced yourself that my generosity was your birthright." I signaled to Veronica, who was standing to my right, looking like the angel of retribution in her dark suit. She stepped forward and placed a thick blue leather folder in my hands. I opened it slowly, letting the sound of the crisp paper rustling be heard over the murmurs of the crowd. I pulled out the first document. It was old, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, signed 20 years ago when I first established the family trust. I held it up. "Jason, do you recognize this?" I asked. "Of course you don't. You never bothered to read the paperwork. You were too busy spending the dividends. This is the deed to the company. And right here at the bottom is the name of the sole proprietor. It does not say Jason. It says my name. It has always said my name. You are not a partner. You are not a shareholder. You are not even a junior executive. In the eyes of the law and the board of directors, you are a salaried employee, an at-will employee with a title I gave you to stroke your ego." Jason turned pale, the blood draining from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Tiffany let go of his jacket and took a step back, looking at him with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. But I was not finished. I turned the page. I needed to sever the cord completely. I needed to make sure there was no ambiguity left. I continued speaking, my eyes locked on my son. "And as an employee, you are subject to the code of conduct outlined in your employment contract. Specifically, I would like to draw your attention to Clause 4, Section B. We call it the Morality and Loyalty Clause. It states quite clearly that any employee who acts with malice against the owner, who embezzles funds or who uses company resources for unauthorized personal enrichment, is subject to immediate termination for cause." I paused. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I took a deep breath. It gave me no pleasure to do this, but it was necessary, like cutting off a gangrenous limb to save the body. "Jason," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You used company accounts to pay for this wedding without authorization. You used company funds to buy that diamond ring on Tiffany's finger. You have violated every fiduciary duty you owed to me and to the firm. Therefore, as the owner and CEO, I am terminating your employment. Effective immediately. You are fired, son." Jason staggered back as if I had physically struck him. Fired, he whispered the word foreign on his tongue. You can't fire me. I am your son. I closed the folder with a snap. Being my son was a privilege, Jason, not a shield for your corruption. And you abused that privilege until there was nothing left. Now it was Veronica's turn. She stepped up to the microphone, adjusting her glasses. She held a tablet in her hand, her face impassive, her tone professional and icy. She addressed the couple directly. Mr. Jason, Miss Tiffany, please listen carefully, because the situation is evolving rapidly. As of 10 minutes ago, I have executed the instructions given to me by the board. She tapped the screen of her tablet. The black card you are carrying in your wallet, Jason, has been deactivated. The credit line has been frozen. The supplemental cards issued to Tiffany have also been canceled. I have already notified the vendors here tonight. The caterer, the florist, the venue manager. They have been informed that the company will not be covering these expenses. If you wish for the party to continue, you will need to provide an alternative form of payment immediately. I believe the total outstanding balance for tonight is roughly $150,000. I saw Tiffany reach into her purse, frantically pulling out her phone, likely checking her banking app. I watched her face crumble as she realized the accounts were locked. But Veronica continued, relentless. She was listing the assets like a coroner listing the contents of a dead man's pockets. Regarding your residence, Veronica said, looking up from her screen. The penthouse apartment in the financial district is corporate housing. It is reserved for active officers of the company. Since your employment has been terminated, your right to occupy the premises has been revoked. The legal team has already filed the eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Security will be there tomorrow at noon to change the locks and collect the key cards. Anything left inside after that time will be placed in storage at your expense. Tiffany let out a strangled sound, a gasp that was half sob, half scream. We live there, she cried out. You can't just throw us out on the street. That is our home. It was never your home, I interjected. It was my property that I allowed you to use. And you treated it with the same disrespect you treated me. Veronica cleared her throat, drawing their attention back to her. And finally, she said, gesturing towards the large floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the valet parking area. The Porsche 911 GT3. The one with the custom ribbon that was supposed to be your wedding gift from the company. It was a company lease. Since you are no longer an employee, the lease is void. If you look out the window right now, you will see that the repossession team is remarkably efficient. The entire room turned to look. Through the glass, under the orange glow of the streetlights, we could all see a large flatbed tow truck. A man in coveralls was hooking chains to the front axle of the gleaming silver sports car. Jason ran to the window, pressing his hands against the glass, watching helplessly as his status symbol, his pride and joy, was hoisted into the air. He looked like a child watching his favorite toy being taken away, but there was no sympathy in the room, only a cold, morbid curiosity. Jason turned back to the room, his face wet with sweat, his eyes wild. Dad, please, he begged, his voice cracking. Stop this. You've made your point. This is humiliating. We can talk about this. I'll sign whatever you want. Just tell them to put the car down. Tell them to turn the cards back on. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. The well of forgiveness had finally run dry. I didn't do this to you, Jason, I said softly. You did this to yourself. You built a life on a foundation of lies and greed, and now you are surprised that it is collapsing under its own weight. I am not negotiating. I am not debating. I am finished. The final blow, however, did not come from me. It came from the person Jason thought was his partner in crime. It came from Tiffany. She stood in the middle of the dance floor, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between the window where the car was disappearing and the man she had just married. The calculation in her eyes was terrifying to behold. She was doing the math, and the equation was coming up zero. She looked at Jason, and the mask of the loving bride fell away completely, revealing the predator underneath. She didn't see a husband. She didn't see a man she loved. She saw a bad investment. She saw a man with no job, no home, no car, and no future inheritance. She realized she had handcuffed herself to a sinking ship. "You liar!" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. The guests closest to her recoiled. "You useless, pathetic liar. You told me you had everything secured. You told me the old man was handled." "Tiffany, baby, please," Jason pleaded, reaching out for her hand. "We can fix this. We can sue him." "We can, don't touch me," she shrieked, slapping his hand away. "Sue him with what money, Jason? You don't have a dime. You are nothing. You are a fraud. I wasted 2 years of my life on you because I thought you were a CEO, not a glorified secretary." She started clawing at her left hand. The ring, the massive diamond that I had foolishly paid for, was stuck on her finger. She yanked at it violently, not caring about the pain, desperate to separate herself from the failure standing in front of her. With a final brutal tug, the ring came loose. "I don't want this," she screamed. "I don't want you. I am not going to be the wife of a broke loser living in a motel." She threw the ring. She didn't just drop it. She hurled it with all the force of her rage. It struck Jason right in the cheekbone, leaving an angry red mark, before bouncing across the dance floor with a metallic skittering sound that seemed to go on forever. "I am done," she yelled, gathering the heavy fabric of her wedding dress in her hands. She kicked off her expensive heels, leaving them where they fell. "I am annulling this. Don't you dare follow me. I am done with you and your crazy family." She turned and ran. She ran past the stunned bridesmaids, past the shocked parents, past the cake that had cost $5,000. She ran out of the double doors of the banquet hall, her bare feet slapping against the floor, fleeing the scene of the crime, fleeing the debt, fleeing the man she had promised to love, for richer or for poorer. Apparently, the poorer part was a deal-breaker she wasn't willing to entertain for even 5 minutes. Jason stood alone in the center of the room. The red mark on his face was beginning to swell. He looked at the closed doors where his wife had just vanished. Then he looked at the floor where the ring lay. Then slowly he turned his gaze to me. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare of his own making. I looked back at him, my heart heavy with a sadness that threatened to drown me. But my resolve was harder than steel. I had saved him from the consequences of his actions for his entire life. Tonight, for the first time, I loved him enough to let him fall. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice weary but final. "I apologize for the disruption. The banquet is over. Please go home." I stepped down from the podium and walked toward the exit, Veronica falling into step beside me. I didn't look back at my son. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage behind me, knowing that the hardest part was over and the long, lonely road of rebuilding my life was just beginning. The banquet hall was clearing out with a speed that was almost insulting. The guests, people I had known for decades, business partners, distant relatives, were scrambling for the exits, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. They kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact, whispering behind their hands, desperate to disassociate themselves from the spectacle of my son's ruin. The air, once filled with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation, now smelled of stale champagne and humiliation. I stood there, an island of calm in the center of the wreckage, watching the backs of the retreating crowd. Jason was the only one who didn't move toward the doors. He stood frozen for a moment, his eyes fixed on the empty space where his bride had been, his mind struggling to process the absolute speed of his downfall. Then he looked at me. The arrogance that had defined his posture for the last 5 years evaporated, replaced by a terrified primal need. He took a step toward me, then another, his legs wobbling as if the bones had turned to water. He didn't walk. He collapsed. He hit the marble floor with a heavy thud, his knees cracking against the hard stone, unaware of the pain, or perhaps welcoming it as a distraction from the agony in his soul. He crawled the last few feet, reaching out with trembling hands to grasp the hem of my trousers. He looked up at me, his face streaked with tears and snot, his eyes red and swollen, the mark from the ring Tiffany had thrown already turning a dark, angry purple on his cheek. "Dad. Please," he sobbed, his voice a broken, high-pitched wail that echoed painfully in the cavernous room. "You can't do this. You can't leave me like this. I was tricked, Dad. She lied to me. She manipulated me. I didn't know what I was doing. I swear to God I didn't mean to hurt you. It was all her. She made me crazy. Please, Dad. I'm your son. Don't throw me away." I looked down at him, at the man clinging to my leg like a drowning sailor clinging to a piece of driftwood. For a fleeting second, the years peeled away. I didn't see a 30-year-old embezzler. I saw a toddler with scraped knees crying for me to pick him up. I saw the 7-year-old who had made me a Father's Day card with macaroni and glue. I saw the boy I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo, the boy whose laughter used to be the only sound I needed to be happy. My heart gave a painful, violent lurch. The instinct to protect him, to reach down and pull him up, to tell him that I would fix it, that I would write one more check and make the monsters go away, was overwhelming. It was burned into my DNA. But then another memory forced its way to the surface, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. I remembered the meeting in my office just 3 days ago. I remembered the look of pure, unadulterated contempt in his eyes when he thought I was powerless. I remembered the sting of his hand against my face, the physical shock of the slap he had delivered when I dared to question his spending. I remembered the words he had hissed at me, the threat to put me in a state-run nursing home, to drug me into silence so he could enjoy my money without the inconvenience of my presence. He hadn't been tricked then. Tiffany hadn't been in that room. That was him. That was the darkness that lived in his own heart. The image of the toddler faded, replaced by the reality of the predator kneeling before me. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he had lost. He was crying because the ATM had stopped dispensing cash and he didn't know how to survive without it. I stepped back, pulling my leg from his grasp. He fell forward onto his hands, his shoulders shaking with fresh sobs. I looked at him with a clarity that was terrifying in its intensity. The love was still there, buried deep under layers of scar tissue, but the trust was dead. And love without trust is just a hostage situation. "You were not tricked, Jason," I said, my voice low and devoid of warmth. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough on its own. You are a grown man. You made choices. You chose to sign those checks. You chose to mock me to your friends. You chose to view my life's work as nothing more than a piggy bank for your vanity. Tiffany didn't force you to become this. She just gave you permission to be the person you wanted to be all along. He looked up, his mouth opening to protest, to spin another lie, but I cut him off. You chose greed over family. I continued, my eyes locking with his. You looked at me, your own father, and you didn't see a human being. You saw an obstacle. You saw a walking wallet that wasn't dying fast enough for your liking. That wasn't Tiffany. That was you. That was your soul, Jason. I took a deep breath, feeling the finality of the moment settling in my bones. I can forgive a mistake, son. I can forgive a bad investment. I can forgive a failure. But I do not raise snakes. And I certainly do not let them live in my house after they have bitten me. Jason stared at me, the blood draining from his face as he realized that this time there was no safety net. There was no lecture followed by a hug. There was only the cold, hard ground. I turned away from him. It was the hardest physical movement I have ever made in my life. It felt like tearing off my own arm. But I did it. I turned my back on my son. Veronica was waiting for me a few feet away. Her face was pale, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, but she nodded at me, a silent gesture of support and respect. She knew what this cost me. She offered me her arm and I took it, leaning on her strength, because mine was rapidly fading. We started walking toward the main exit. Behind me, I heard the scramble of movement as Jason tried to scramble to his feet, tried to run after us. "Dad, wait, no. You can't." He barely made it 3 steps before 2 large men in dark suits stepped into his path. My personal security team. Men I had hired to protect me from threats, never imagining the threat would be my own flesh and blood. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. They simply formed a wall of muscle and stone that he could not pass. I didn't look back. I focused on the exit signs, the red glowing letters guiding me out of this hell. I focused on the rhythm of my footsteps on the marble. I focused on breathing in and out, forcing air into lungs that felt too tight. Behind me, the screaming intensified. It wasn't the cry of a child anymore. It was the howl of a man realizing he was completely and utterly alone. "Dad, don't leave me. I have nothing, Dad." His voice cracked and broke, echoing off the high ceilings, bouncing around the empty tables laden with expensive food that would never be eaten. Thousands of dollars of lobster and steak cooling on silver platters. Towers of untouched champagne glasses. The wedding cake standing like a monument to waste. And on every table the little white cards with the unpaid invoices that the vendors would soon be handing to him. I walked through the double doors and out into the night. The cool air hit my face, drying the sweat on my brow. The silence of the parking lot was a relief after the noise inside. I got into the waiting car, Veronica sliding in beside me. As the driver pulled away, I stared straight ahead. I didn't look at the window of the banquet hall. I didn't want to see the silhouette of my son alone in that vast, empty room, screaming at a father who was no longer there to listen. The engine hummed, carrying me away from the ruins of my family, driving me toward a future that was uncertain and lonely, but finally free of the lie. The clinking of silverware against ceramic plates was the only sound in the small, dimly lit bistro tucked away in a quiet corner of the Upper West Side. It was a stark, almost jarring contrast to the cacophony that had defined my life just 7 days ago. There were no screaming brides, no crashing chandeliers, and no sobbing sons begging for a salvation they had not earned. Just the gentle hum of a city moving on, indifferent to the personal apocalypse I had orchestrated. I sat across from Veronica, as I had done so many times over the last 20 years. But tonight, the air between us was different. The tension of the impending war was gone, replaced by the quiet, aching exhaustion of the survivors. We were eating a simple meal, roasted chicken and vegetables food that tasted like sustenance rather than a display of wealth. Veronica placed her fork down and reached for her glass of water, her eyes scanning a report on her phone before she slid it across the table to me. She didn't need to speak for me to know what it contained. It was the final damage assessment, the closing of the ledger on the collateral damage of the wedding. The legal system, it seemed, was far less forgiving of tantrums than I had been. Tiffany's parents, those people who had sneered at my staff and treated my hospitality as their due, were currently being processed at the central booking station. The police report was thorough. In their rage at being ejected from the venue, they had decided to take their frustration out on the property. They had smashed cases of vintage wine bottles that had been aging since before they were born, and they had overturned antique furniture in the lobby. The total damages exceeded $50,000. They were facing felony charges for criminal mischief and destruction of property. They were not wealthy people despite their pretensions. This would bankrupt them. They would lose their home to pay for the wine they had destroyed. It was a petty, ugly end to a petty, ugly ambition. I looked at the mugshots on the screen, their faces twisted in confusion and indignation, still unable to comprehend that actions have consequences. I felt no triumph, only a dull, weary sense of inevitability. They had played a game they did not understand, and they had lost everything. And then there was Jason. I handed the phone back to Veronica and looked out the window at the passing cars. I did not need a report to know where my son was. My private investigator had sent me the photos this morning. They were grainy, taken from a distance, but they were clear enough to break a father's heart all over again. Jason was working. For the first time in his 30 years of life, he was actually working. He had found a job at a diner in Queens, a place that smelled of grease and desperation, the kind of place he wouldn't have been caught dead in a week ago. He was a waiter. The photos showed him wearing a stained apron, balancing a tray of dirty dishes, his face glistening with sweat, his eyes dull and exhausted. He was living in a hostel, sharing a room with 3 other men, sleeping on a bunk bed. He was working double shifts to pay off the debts that were now his alone. I imagined him standing there, his feet aching in cheap shoes, being yelled at by customers for cold coffee, being snapped at by a manager who didn't care about his last name. I imagined the shock of it, the physical reality of labor, the humiliating realization that the world does not care if you are tired or sad. It was a brutal fall, from the penthouse to the scullery, from the Porsche to the subway. I took a sip of wine, the liquid tasting bitter on my tongue. I felt a profound sadness, a hollow ache in the center of my chest where my pride used to be. It is a terrible thing to watch your child suffer. It goes against every biological imperative. But alongside the sadness, there was something else. A lightness. A sense of space opening up in my lungs. For years, Jason had been a tumor on my life, a malignant growth of entitlement and greed that was slowly killing me, draining my resources and poisoning my joy. I had finally cut it out. The surgery had been traumatic, and the wound was still fresh and bleeding, but the sickness was gone. I was no longer being held hostage in my own home. I was no longer afraid of my own son. Veronica cleared her throat, pulling me back to the present. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single thick document. It was bound in a simple blue cover. She placed it on the table between us next to the salt and pepper shakers. It was the last piece of business. The final seal on the tomb of the past. "These are the papers for the new foundation," she said softly. "Everything is set up exactly as you instructed. The assets have been transferred. The board of trustees has been selected. All it needs is your signature." I looked at the document. The title was printed in bold black letters: The Martha Caldwell Scholarship Fund. Martha, my late wife. Ideally, Jason would have been her legacy. He would have carried her kindness and her name into the future. But he had chosen a different path. So now her legacy would be this. I picked up my pen. This fund was being established with the money that was supposed to be Jason's inheritance. The millions I had set aside for him, the safety net I had woven to catch him, were now going to catch someone else. The fund was dedicated to underprivileged students. Brilliant young men and women from backgrounds like mine, kids who had nothing but grit and a dream, kids who knew the value of $1 because they had never had one. I uncapped the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name on the line, the ink flowing smoothly, binding the contract. With that signature, I was transferring the future of my family from my bloodline to my values. I was betting on strangers who shared my spirit rather than a son who only shared my DNA. I handed the folder back to Veronica. "It is done," I said. She nodded, placing the folder back in her bag with a reverence that touched me. "It is a beautiful thing you are doing, sir," she said. Martha would have been proud. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that felt foreign on my face after a week of frowning. "I hope so," I said. I looked out the window again. The city of New York was spread out before me, a sprawling tapestry of lights and shadows. At 70 years old, most men are looking back, counting their days, preparing for the end. But as I sat there, stripped of my family, stripped of my illusions, I didn't feel like I was ending. I felt like I was beginning. The weight of expectation was gone. The burden of carrying a grown man was gone. The fear of being used was gone. I was alone, yes. but I was free. I had my health, I had my company, I had my dignity. And now I had a new purpose. I had thousands of adopted children I would never meet, students whose lives would be changed because I had the courage to say no to the one child I knew. I signaled for the check. I was ready to go home, not to a house filled with tension and ungrateful heirs, but to a quiet sanctuary where the only noise was the music I chose to play. As we walked out into the cool night air, the city noise washed over me, vibrant and alive. I buttoned my coat, feeling the chill but feeling stronger for it. I walked toward the car, my step lighter than it had been in a decade. Sometimes to teach your child the most important lesson of their life, you have to let them lose everything. You have to let them hit the bottom so they can find out what they are made of. You have to stop being their savior so they can learn to save themselves. And sometimes to find yourself again, to reclaim the life you worked so hard to build. You have to be brave enough to let go of the people you love the most when you realize they are the ones holding you underwater. I had let go. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally breathing. If this story of tough love and late awakening resonated with you, guys, leave a like and share your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe now so you never miss the next profound life lesson. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep telling these stories. Thank you for watching.